So you became the company clerk, and then what happened?
Well, during the time I was in Japan, did some interesting things while we're on the subject of Army. One weekend, several of us climbed Mount Fuji, which we went, drove up about the 4,000 foot level, which is as far as you could go, and hiked the rest of the way. It's 12,500 and some feet.
Oh wow.
And spent the night on they have all these stations going up. We took rations with us and canteens because we didn't want to trust the local food and water, but we did spend the night. Japanese have these mats, you sleep on, and you paid, I forget, it wasn't very much, maybe 100 yen, something like that. And at that time, a yen was 360 to $1, so wasn't very expensive. But anyway, we got next morning. We got to the top, probably 10:30.
Hey Mom, you dropped your napkin.
And got to the top. Looked into the crater and
Turn around. Mom, turn around. Look down.
and then we went down. Didn't go down the regular trail. We went down. There was an area where it was just gravel like lava, and we were down in a little over 2 hours.
Is that right?
And drove back to the camp. This was on a Sunday. We'd gone up on a Saturday. I got down to the bottom, got in the truck, and looked at the back of my boots, and they were completely worn away. Fortunately, my buddy Ted Schrader worked in the supply room, and he said, "Don't worry about it. I'll get you a new pair Monday." But I had a pair of combat boots shot as a result of that. Anyway, we went on maneuvers at Okinawa. Spent a week at Okinawa, which was an interesting experience. Did quite a bit of weekend touring, places like Yokohama and Tokyo, which was, I enjoyed the sightseeing there. This was, the occupation ended the first of the year of 52. So I got an occupation medal since I'd gotten there right after Thanksgiving at 51. And Japanese treated the Americans well. They were used to taking orders, and that's why they were so difficult fighters, because they were willing to die for their emperor. And when their emperor told them to, we lost and treat the Americans well, why they did. And one of
Did
the
you ever
nice.
date any Japanese girls while you were there?
Did I what?
Ever date any Japanese girls while you were
There
there?
were girls that came to the dances that they had, but I never did date any of them. I danced with them, but
They'd call those hookers, though, right?
they what?
They'd call those hookers, right?
Well, gals that came to dances, the dances were arranged by the recreation people there on camp, and they screened them fairly well. I don't think
You don't think they were
There
all
were-
hookers?
there were all kinds of
Just
cat
some of
houses. There were all kinds of cat houses around, but
them? Were there?
it's kind of funny. There were about half a dozen of us that got to be pretty good buddies. Did a lot of the sightseeing and so on together, and I still keep in contact with this Ted Schrader. He got out of the army, went back to med school, and spent his career up in Syracuse at Upstate Medical Center as a kidney specialist. Fred DeAngelis, I saw him once in New Jersey. He had worked in a movie theater before he was drafted, and went back and ran a theater up in Patterson, New Jersey. And Archie Crick was another one. We all lost our track of Archie, and Gene Forgetch was another one. Gene came from a little town in South Illinois. Can't even think of the name of the town, but I went to look him up when I had Illinois in my territory, and he was out of town on business. He apparently had a little business there, and it was down near Marion. I can't think of the name of the town, but anyway, those were some of the
Stop in and
guys.
see the missus?
Hmm?
Did you stop in and see the missus? since he
No,
was out of town?
I telephoned. I talked to her on the phone, but anyway, those were. We used to go to movies together and so on. I spent a lot of time writing your mother, and so when I got out of the army, I had to stay at Camp Carson, Colorado. It's now Fort Carson. For about a week or so after I got coming home. This was in.
When did Mom take over your car from John?
She didn't until I got home, and the car had 40-some thousand miles on it.
Well, I heard she came over and said, "John, I'm taking the car." That's the story. Is she came over, took the car, and John didn't really like her too much because she came and took your car.
If that happened, I'd never heard of it.
Really?
No.
You've really never heard that story? Seriously?
Know her what?
You've never heard that story before? Seriously?
No.
I heard Uncle John was pretty angry at her for a while.
Took the car, why?
Well, you were overseas, and the car was supposed to be garaged, but I think Uncle John was driving it. So.
Well,
She
John
came
and Mother were both driving it, Joe, because Mother didn't have a car.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe Mom didn't come get it then. I thought what I had heard was Mom came, got it, and started driving it, and Uncle John didn't like that too
Not
much.
that I know of.
No.
Who told you that?
Actually, I think Uncle John did.
Well, if that happened, it's news to me. She may have borrowed it a time or two, you know, for some reason.
I think that what he said was she came and got it. I was under the impression she came and got it.
She didn't have my blessing to do that.
But you had and it was a really nice car too.
It was a 1950 Plymouth
Right.
that I bought brand new for
Right. It's like
$1,650.
brand new.
Yeah. But anyway, that when when I was ready to come home, why there's no more flying. I and a lot of other guys got on the General M.M. Patrick. We spent 17 days stopping at Adak, Alaska to pick up some additional troops.
So is that the first official cruise that you were on?
That was the first time I cruised, and we were on the high seas for 17 days, and I was sick for 17 days.
The whole time?
I lost 20 pounds
Wow.
in that time, so anyway, we came into Seattle, put us on a train to Camp Carson, Colorado. Now, your mother did come out, and I believe with John, drove my car to Camp Carson.
Well, of course. She was driving around your car while you were gone.
Well, sure. Anyway, we spent several days together then. They went back. She was working by then. She worked for Mutual of Omaha. She did their house organ magazine, went out to their insurance agents. So anyway, I got home then the last part of May, and we had agreed to get married, and she wanted to do it on her parents' 30th anniversary, which was June 13th, and so she had found an apartment that we rented and got moved in, had bought a bed and moved. Well, I stayed at Mother's. We got married, and on a Saturday morning, spent our first night at the Cornhusker Hotel in Lincoln, Nebraska, and then drove to New Orleans on our honeymoon. Came back, and we weren't in that apartment 2 months, and I forget what the rent was, but it was really too much for our circumstances. She was making a couple $100 a month, and I was getting like $160 on the GI Bill. And we decided to look for something less expensive, which we did. Found an upstairs apartment there in Omaha, and moved into it. And
How much was it?
I think it was about $75 a month. And I went to school. I worked at not only the station in Council Bluffs, some weekends and some after school, but a guy named Minor Weir in Omaha I'd gotten to know him when I was driving the truck in the warehouse. And, Uh, I worked for him some weekends. So we made out all right. Every Sunday we would go to church in Council Bluffs with Mother, and she'd have us to Sunday noon dinner, and we'd do our washing. And because we didn't have a washing machine at the apartment. And 2 years later, June of '55, I'd gone back down to the Phillips office. They told me that they had a job for me there as a marketing rep trainee, and but along, I think January or February, I'd gotten a letter from Bob McBride in Raleigh saying that if I would come to Raleigh, that they would start me in the training program at $340 a month. And Omaha was only $307. So, and that there was a lot of opportunity because this was a new market and they were expanding, and there would be chances to move up. So I thought that would be a good deal. So we rented a U-Haul trailer, loaded what we had into it, and drove to Raleigh. And got to Raleigh and found an apartment, Glenwood Gardens, on Glenwood Avenue, where Oberlin Road comes into Glenwood,
And how much was that apartment?
that was $75 a month. And they told me that, in fact, that first we got there like on a Thursday, and they told me that they were having a grand opening in Florence, South Carolina that weekend, and they'd like me to go. So I left your mother in a motel and went. Your mother proceeded to get food poisoning and ended up in the hospital.
Oh my God.
So when I got back, she was back in the motel from the hospital. The manager of the motel had been very nice and had taken her to the hospital and picked her up and brought her back to the motel when she was discharged. So.
Did you even know she went to the hospital?
Did what?
Did you even know she went to the hospital when she was going and came
Not
home?
Not until I got back.
No?
She had asked the motel manager not to tell anybody. So, anyway, she was being a martyr. So anyway, we were there in the apartment until the following May. And I was traveling. The Raleigh division had the Carolinas and Virginia. I was, my training process, Bob McBride said, you worked in the warehouse, you've worked in a service station, we want you to be a lubrication sales engineer. And, well, he just told me a lubricants man. They sent me to Bartlesville. I flew to Bartlesville in September. And when I got back after 2 weeks of training, I found my calling cards all printed up that I was a lubrication sales engineer.
Nice.
And I traveled for 2 weeks with the guy who was head of lubricants there in the division, and at that point, one of my first on my own was they sent me to West Jefferson, North Carolina, up in the hills, and I was to put on the lube part of a dealer meeting for a new customer, brand new to Phillips. They had switched over, I believe, from Gulf. Anyway, I was to give them a 30-minute presentation on lubricants. So I get there in the middle of the afternoon, and they were going to have a big barbecue. And the gal at the front desk said, go out to the warehouse and look for Fuzz. Fuzz is a warehouse foreman. He's going to be in charge of the meeting tonight. So I go out in the warehouse, and Fuzz says, we're going to have a great meeting tonight. And he says, let me show you what I've got. He says, telling me about the barbecue. Then he goes over and he's got about 6 cases of ball mason jars stacked up. He pulls out a pint jar. It's full of some clear liquid, and he holds it up, goes over to the window and he holds it up, and he says, I want you to taste this. He says, it's apple brandy. He says, this came from the best producer from around these hills. Of course, it was bootleg stuff. But anyway.
Was it pretty powerful?
Well, he wanted me to taste it, and I acted like, and it burned the inside of your mouth. I didn't get enough to affect me, but it sure affected a lot of the customers that were there that night. I don't think anybody heard what I was talking about in my lube pitch.
Did you pretend to drink it?
What?
Did you drink some, or did you pretend to drink it, or what?
I put a little bit in my mouth, and that was it. I'd heard too many stories about being run through radiators and getting full of lead and stories like that.
Losing your eyesight?
Yeah. Anyway, and in May, they said, we'd like you to replace our salesman in Fayetteville. And so I went down to Fayetteville. In the meantime, once we moved to Raleigh, your mother looked for work. The best job she could find was the state wanted somebody, and they wanted them to work 6 days a week, and wanted to pay her about 3/4 of what she was making at Mutual of Omaha. And that was the only job she could find. She looked for a couple of weeks. So she said, let me manage the money and we'll live on what you make. And we did. So she of course wanted to get a family started, and
so she kept tricking you?
I was 26 by then. She was 25, and
she tricked you?
Hmm?
Did she trick you?
Did she kiss me?
Trick you?
No, she didn't trick me.
With Jane?
We tried and tried and tried, and with no luck. And by the time we moved to Fayetteville the following May, why, she was researching adoptions, and she had us scheduled to go to Morehead City to a meeting on adoption when she decided that she was pregnant.
You had your heart set on getting a nice little young.
Yeah.
Would you-
12-year-old girl, sure. Anyway,
I thought you wanted a male athlete.
we ended up with Jane the following July 31st. And
Is that a surprise? Was it a surprise or no? Jane,
What?
was she a surprise? Because you were looking into adoptions. Was that a surprise?
we didn't go to the meeting
Oh, you didn't.
because your mother's, I guess she went to the doctor and they said, you're pregnant.
Oh,
So anyway, the meeting was in September or sometime like that. It was later than that because Jane didn't come along till July 31st of 57, and she had me go to the doctor and have a sperm count done and all that stuff before we really got serious talking about adoption. Anyway, I'd been pretty successful signing new business. By the end of 57, I had the whole territory covered. When I went down there, I had 2 customers. I had a customer in Fairmont that had Robson County, and I had a customer in Sanford that had Moore and Lee counties. I signed up the guy that owned the local radio station for Cumberland County. I signed up.
what kind of lubrication did he use?
Kind of lubrication for what?
Well, you said you were successful in opening new accounts. What does the radio guy need? Lubrication?
Well, I followed up on inquiries and convinced them that being a Phillips jobber was a good deal. And make a long story short, I got all 8 counties covered. And in fact, I had a customer in Sampson County that they had given to me in early 57. And then when I got all these others signed up, I took him away and gave him to the guy in Wilmington because he was not doing as well as I was in signing new business. So in July of 58, they asked us to move to Richmond because they had converted a mobile jobber in Richmond, Little Oil Company, to Phillips. That was their largest customer in the division. He had a terminal on the James River, and so they wanted me to go up and handle him. They gave me Central Virginia. I had 3 other customers at the time. So anyway, we moved to Richmond. That's where we bought our first house. We bought a 3-bedroom brick home, and it was out in the county, and paid $14,900.
How many bedrooms?
Had 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. Had a living room, a small dining area with a fireplace.
In the dining area was a fireplace?
Yeah, we never did get a dining table, but no garage. But I think I enjoyed living there more than probably any place else, because the 2 years we were there, practically all the neighbors were in about the same pickle we were in. They worked for various companies and weren't making enough to live very high on the hog, and we did a lot of, during good weather, somebody'd start the grill in the backyard and we'd all get together and cook hamburgers and just
Did cheap things.
made a lot of friends.
Mm-hmm.
And
Did you go to church there?
yes, we went to the Tuckahoe Presbyterian Church. In Fayetteville, we'd gone to the Highland Church, Presbyterian Church, which it was one of the larger, more established churches. Tuckahoe Presbyterian was not as large, but a fair-sized church, I think 300 or 400 congregation. And
when did Alan come along then?
Alan came along in September of '59, and then in July of 1960, got called down to Raleigh, and they said, "We would like you to be Director of Sales Development," which was in charge of training, hiring, and any salaried service stations. Well, at that time, they only had the salaried training station, but well, I'll take that back. They had one, they had just received orders that spring that any station that Phillips had financed, if the jobber stopped paying on it, turned it back, we would operate it with salaried employees. And we had one in Roanoke we'd taken back, Roanoke, Virginia. So anyway, we moved to Cary because that was where you could get a good deal on a house. And we bought a house at 404 Ralph Drive. We paid $16,100 for that house. And it had 3 bedrooms, living room with a fireplace, dining room, and a family room, and no garage there either. But it was a larger house than the one in Richmond. We had trouble selling the house in Richmond. I ended up leasing it to a guy who had moved up there, a Phillips TBA man. And finally, after he decided he moved, and a realtor offered to take it off our hands uh, for the amount of the mortgage in order to take over the mortgage, and so that's how we unloaded that place. And so I was director of sales development. I kept getting more service stations. Jobbers would dump them in our lap when they couldn't make the payments and sell enough. At the time, I went to Bartlesville for training in September of '61. So I'd been there a little over a year and a half, or about a year and a half. Let's see, I had I think it was 12 altogether, scattered around like spokes on a wheel, several hours drive. I had one in Asheville, that one in Roanoke, Denmark, South Carolina, Fairfax and Allendale, South Carolina, Norfolk, Virginia, and the coup de grace was a brand new one they built in Washington, D.C. and asked us to run it until they established a new division in Baltimore. And so I had my hands full by the time I got moved.
And what year was that?
Got moved to Bartlesville in September '61. And that was to be a year and a half to 2 year training program. It was called a management training program. And what we did was work directly under a general sales manager and handled mostly the real estate deals that came in and the proposals for real estate and so on, jobber sales contracts, things like that. Did a lot of work with the legal department. Well, we had been there let's see, we'd come in September, and following March, they called me in and they said, we have opened an office in Maplewood, New Jersey, and would like you to go out as a marketing assistant in Maplewood. So away we went to New Jersey, rented a house in Basking Ridge for $250 a month, and I remember your mother talking to her mother, telling her that, and Nina said, there are a lot of people here in Wakefield that don't make $250 a month. So anyway, that was how we got to New Jersey. Well, I had a pregnant wife, and the way we went, we got moved in, and on July 4th, why, early that morning, she announced that it was time to go to the hospital. So we had a new arrival, and that was in Morristown. We were living in Basking Ridge, which is just south of Morristown. So that summer, I was working for a guy named John Hall, who was district manager. In those days they called them assistant division managers. And I was his marketing assistant. And he had upstate New York and northern New Jersey in his territory. And we got to be fairly good friends with them. And I traveled quite a bit, although we had two big customers that we had signed in northern New Jersey, Kimber Petroleum and Rheinauer Oil Company, and both of them had said that they didn't want John calling on them anymore.
How come?
Well, Rheinauer said that he's got corn growing out of his ears. John was from Des Moines, been transferred from Des Moines, and actually he was from Omaha. But anyway, Rheinauer's asked that he not call on him anymore, and Kimber then later, John had gone out, and the old man Kimber, not liking him very well, liked to feed him martinis for lunch, and John was dumb enough to drink them. I remember one day, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when Kimber pulled up out in front of the office and opened the door, and John literally fell out of the car. I ran out and helped him up and took him in his office and closed the door, and there was a coffee pot still on. The coffee was horrible, I'm sure, but fed him coffee, and after everybody had left, I loaded him in the car and drove him home. But anyway, old man Kimber really didn't care for him, and so division manager Mally Chisholm told me, why don't you take over those 2 accounts? And so I didn't have to, and he was sympathetic. We had a new baby. So the following spring, John found himself as division real estate representative, and I was district manager. I was assistant division manager. It was about a year later that they changed the title to district manager. So anyway, we were there in New Jersey. We had started looking that summer for another place to live, or to buy a home. We were renting the one in Basking Ridge, and did an awful lot of looking, and we didn't have a lot of money to put down on the house. And saw an ad in Somerset County for in a new development. They had 5% financing. Well, that was practically unheard of in that area. It was being handled by a real estate company called Tushak and Halpern. Sid Halpern was an uncle of our jobber in Somerville, and had been involved in selling us a property where we built a service station on Route 22. You may remember that.
Yeah.
And so we came down to this development on Brown Road and called Shadow Oaks. Drove in and walked into the model home, and there sat Sid Halpern. And of course he knew me because I had been involved in the proposal and the purchase of that Somerville property. And and we were impressed with the houses and with the area. So Sid said, I will get you one of the better lots. And he also said, the guy's having to pay a premium to the bank for this 5% financing, but if you really need it, I'll see that you get it. And we were lucky because he was able to handle that. And the lot we had, sat at the top of an intersection. He said, this is in effect a corner lot without the corner lot premium, because they were getting $500 extra for corner lots.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we got the house in Shadow Oaks, 1239 Evergreen Drive. But when we first made the deal on the property, it was Pine Drive.
Is that right?
And it turned out that there was another Pine Drive in Bridgewater Township, and the town told them that they couldn't use that name because it was a duplication, so they changed it to Evergreen Drive.
Mm.
But anyway, that was, we signed the papers on that house in July of '62 and moved in July of '64. Took them 2 years to get that house built.
Wow.
We went out, we made trips out there all the time to watch the construction, and to start with, they didn't get started that year. They dug a big hole for the foundation, and it filled with water. They'd hit a spring.
Oh, wow.
So they dug down and laid a pipe below the floor of the basement, clear out to the back of that lot. You may remember that.
Yeah, so that's where that came from, huh?
Yeah.
What's under the basement? Wow, that's weird.
And of course they put a hole in the floor for a sump pump, which they figured they'd need. And pumped out the water and went ahead and poured the basement, built the blocks, and put in the footing for the house. And the basement proceeded to fill with water. And so they assured us, the contractor assured us that would not hurt it. But that's when they had to dig the trench and put in the pipe
Mm.
to the back of the lot. So by then we had bought that Chevy that we talked about yesterday,
Mhm.
and went out there one day. The house was well under construction by then, and you must have been, it was in still chilly weather. It must have been the spring of '64, so you were almost 2 years old. And since it was cold, we left you in the car. It was a two-door, if you remember.
Mhm.
We came back to the car after walking around the house. Wasn't very long, but you'd crawled up on both sides and pushed the locks down, locked the car with the keys in the ignition. And I had to break out the little wing window to get in and unlock it. Tried to get you to pull up the knob, and you just laughed and waved your hands and
That was funny, huh?
kind of peed me off.
I bet I did. I'm thinking you had to break out a window.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Anyway, that was the new house in Bridgewater Township. And of course, as you know, we lived there until August of '73. Paid $28,900 for that house, and sold it for $67. So we then had a little equity money when we moved to Raleigh. In '73. But that almost 12 years in New Jersey was quite an experience, as you know.
Mhm. What did you like best about New Jersey?
Well, we made a lot of good friends in New Jersey. We were, as you know, active in that church there. I was chairman of the building committee when we decided to build that building. And
Where'd you guys get the money from?
we borrowed $40,000 from Presbyterian Church, and the rest of it was contributions. The whole thing cost $98,000,
Wow.
and bought a manse, which we financed for, let's see, it was less than we paid for the house in Shadow Oaks. I don't remember exactly. I think it was 27 or 26, but anyway, you could buy a pretty nice house for that money in those days.
Yeah, not anymore. Let's take a break so you can go to the bathroom.
Okay.
Unless you just want to keep talking.
No.